Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Cars and Culture podcast with my dad this time. Say hello.
Hello there, Zaid. How are you doing today?
Doing very, very well. We've been off the air for a little while. As you guys probably can recognise, Grispen's not with me. He's out in Stuttgart doing many exciting things, but we are in a different location now, aren't we? Where are we?
Yes, indeed, Zaid. We are back in the UK.
Back in the UK.
Yes, in a nice town called Reading, which is just up the M4 from London.
Just up the M4. It was a bit of a run to get here from Wembley, but we made it here anyway. I have to say, this is courtesy of Faisal. Thank you very much, Faisal, for letting us use your space. And yeah, just to experience what it's like to do a proper podcast. So obviously we're going to be sticking with cars, hence the name Cars and Culture. And we've got a couple of interesting topics to talk about because what I like to do normally with all my guests is at the beginning of the podcast, just kind of talk about what you've been involved with in the last week when it comes to cars. Obviously, we've been very involved with that together. So why don't you introduce the ladies and gentlemen? What exciting things have you done in the last week when it comes to cars?
Okay, that's a very good question, Zaid. Well, it's been a very active week when it comes to cars. I've actually found on the internet a Citroen BX GTI 16 valve. It was up for sale in Luxembourg, and I have to say it was at a fantastic price. I was very, very tempted. So yeah, that's it.
That's fantastic. Well, okay, so let's just try and tell the viewers here, Citroen BX. Give us a brief introduction. What is a Citroen BX? What makes it so special? Okay. I'm going to grab a picture of it up on here. So give us a quick elevator pitch on what the Citroen BX is.
Okay, Citroen BX is obviously manufactured by the French car manufacturer Citroen in France. It was introduced in 1983 as a follow-up successor of the Citroen GSA. And actually, it's a very, very important car. Some would say, actually, it saved Citroen from collapse because Citroen was going through a very difficult time in the 80s. And this is the car which basically saved the company.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Okay, so we've established the BX is like a kind of humble, average 80s family saloon. A couple of more points which some of you viewers might find really, really interesting. The person who designed the car you see on the screen right here also designed the Lamborghini Countach. So there's that little bit of pedigree Italian flair, the Franco-Italian flair you get with the Citroen BX. I have to say, I mean, I was purely introduced this by my dad because, am I right in saying this is one of your favourite cars?
Yes, indeed.
The fact that you've got two.
Well, the story goes, Zaid, is that one of the very first jobs I took on was after graduating as a motor vehicle technician in the UK. I started off as a vehicle technician for a Citroen dealership. And one of the very first jobs my boss gave me was he pointed towards that car, the Citroen BX GTI, and he said, "The suspension doesn't work. Would you be so kind to fix it?" And you can imagine being an 18-year-old technician, lifted the bonnet up, and there was a plumber's nightmare of pipes everywhere. Yeah, so it was. That was my first kind of connection with this car, and ever since, I have to say, it's stolen a piece of my heart.
That's fantastic. And I'm really glad you mentioned that because I think a lot of the viewers will also, be interested to know that, you started your career working with Citroen and you've been in the auto trade ever since. So this is basically Genesis for you. And it's really nice to see that, how many years? Four? Well, not trying to give away your age, but
well, yeah, it's 41 years since I started.
41 years,
yes.
And this is the car that stole your heart. And this is what Cars and Culture is all about. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most flamboyant supercar. It doesn't have to be something really expensive. At the end of the day, it's whatever captures your heart. It's something that connects you to the vehicle. And this car, the Citroen BX, I think is really you. But this is not just any Citroen BX. This is a BX 16 valve. Yes. What's special about the 16 valve?
Right. Okay. Well, 16 valve, as its name implies, is that the engine is fitted with 16 valves. And I have to say to you, Zaid, in the 80s, it was a very big thing. Things like having 16 valves, ABS, fuel injection, were the big buzzwords and the buzz technologies, let's say, at the time. And so there weren't many cars which had 16 valves, and those which did have 16 valves were very memorable.
Exactly. So just to name off the top of your head, what other cars with 16 valves do you remember from the time? I can remember the Golf GTI 16 valve.
Oh, yes.
What else did we have? We had
There was the Dolomite Sprint, yes.
Yes, very interesting. That was a very early car from the 70s.
From the 70s, yes, indeed.
Yes.
So, yeah, so from a technical point of view, 16 valves allows more air to get into the engine and giving it more power. And at the time, as I say, it was a technology which everyone's like strived to have.
Exactly. Exactly. No, and it's not only 16 valves. You've already alluded to fuel injection was also really, really big technology at the time. What else? Turbocharging as well. The Renault 21 Turbo, things along those lines. The MG Maestro, the Montego Turbo. And then, of course, 16 valve. Okay, that's fantastic. So now we've given you a little bit of an introduction to the BX as a whole, and we've got the 16 valve here as well. Why don't you talk a little bit about the Citroen BXs you've had growing up, and just kind of a little rundown, because you've had quite a few. Mm-hmm. So you started in '83. What was your first Citroen BX?
Okay, as I said to you, I started off as a Citroen technician back in 1983, some 41 years ago, and I remember actually going home. I actually was a proud owner of a Renault 5 those days, and I remember following a white Citroen BX, and I looked at it and I said, wow, that looks really futuristic. And I said to myself, you know what, I work for a Citroen dealership, maybe I should have a chat with the sales guy the next day and to see, you know what could he get me one of them for? And the first car which came to his mind was, you can have my demonstrator, he said.
Nice.
Hey, it's a white 14 RE, and it was honestly a lovely looking car. It was 6 months old, and I was only like 18, and I could afford it with a hire purchase agreement, of course. So then, of course, so I took delivery in October of when was it? It was 1983. Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, just bear with me for 1 second. I'm just going to move this over here. Okay, so October 1983. 83 you took delivery of it. Yeah. Okay, so let's get technical. What was the BX? What could we say about that car?
Okay, well, it had a 1360 engine, which was described as a suitcase engine, laying on its side. It's a Peugeot Citroen engine, which is also seen in the Peugeot and Renault cars as well. It was a practical car. It was a family car. 5-speed gearbox. I think something which is important to point out about this car, with many Citroens, which is a blueprint of Citroen motor cars, is the hydropneumatic self-leveling suspension.
Of course.
Yep. Which always maintains the same height, regardless of whatever load you got in the car. And that was a feature of the car. And of course, the driving, handling. And Citroen at the time was way ahead of its competition when it comes to innovation and technology.
I would definitely agree, especially compared to what we consider as really innovative and leading legacy German car manufacturers. I think the French back in the 70s and the 80s were really ahead of their time, and really, really innovative. Okay, so you started off with a white BX 14RE. Okay, this would have been a Mark 1 car, right?
That's right, guys.
So Mark 1, that went from 1982 till 1986, correct?
Yes.
Fantastic. Your second BX?
Okay, it was 1986 when I saw that Citroen had launched a fuel-injected BX. It was the first fuel-injected Citroen BX on the product line, and it was labeled the GTI.
Yes.
The 19 was a 1905cc engine, GTI, and I saw that car. It was advertised in the summer of '86. I placed order of this car, and I took delivery on the 1st of January 1987. It was in sunrise red.
Fantastic. Very 80s colour.
Yeah, and what a great car. That car was brand new.
That was a brand new car.
Yes,
so,
indeed.
yeah, BX GTI, it was an 8-valve car, so this would have been a Mark II car, I'm guessing, right? So different front lights.
Yes, indeed. So, I mean, the difference between the Mark I and the Mark IIs, for those of you who don't know, is that the Mark I had the traditional instrument cluster, which was like a dial, like a dial which was rotating. We call it the weighing scale dial instrument cluster.
Yes.
And it had very peculiar non-self-cancelling indicators. It was quite a strange looking cockpit because Citroen at the time was very eccentric in terms of its interior design. Outside, it still looked fairly conventional. And the Phase 1 car, which basically consisted of lots of lightweight technology on the car.
As you can see here.
Absolutely. So there you can see it. There's your weighing scale style speedometer, a very futuristic single spoke steering wheel, what you can say, and it looked very modern. The external of the car, the exterior should I say, was very conventional. Characteristics. Looking at this one here, that's a 16 RS, which you see on the picture there. What was really interesting about this car was the reduction in weight. The car was only barely 1,000 kilograms in weight, and a lot of the components were made out of composite glass, GRP, glass reinforced plastics.
That's correct.
Yeah, so
things such as the bonnet, front bumpers, rear bumpers. Tailgate as well.
Yeah,
that's correct.
And there were some trim panels. The C-pillar trim panels were made out of this composite plastic, as well as some trim panels on the roof, helping to reduce the weight of the car.
Fantastic. I mean, a car like this weighs, what, about 1,000 kilograms, if that?
1,000 kilograms,
Which for a family saloon, not a sports car, family saloon is pretty remarkable. And I'm sure you can attest, saving weight improves a lot of things. Improves handling, it improves fuel economy. This is what we mean by Citroen being really ahead of their time. We'll gloss over the fact that some of the interior plastics are a bit cheap and flimsy. And that may have also contributed to the actual weight of the car. But regardless, you can't fault their innovation. Okay, so that's the Mark I BX. Let's talk about the Mark II.
Well, the Mark II pretty much shared the same shell as the Mark I BX. They became a lot more conventional with the interior. So when you look at the interior, for example, the dashboard, you see that it uses conventional analog dials.
There you go.
So much more conventional. And this is with the time when Citroen was starting to become, let's say, dare I say the word normal.
Normal for a Citroen, what?
Because it was always considered to be an eccentric car. So it did have things like indicator stalks.
Right.
Stalks to operate the wipers.
That's it, yeah.
Self-cancelling indicators.
Normal in a normal car, but unheard of in a Citroen.
Unheard of in the Citroen, totally correct. Dials, fuel gauge, oil pressure gauge, things which, and it had the racing look dials, pilot look dials,
yeah.
finger touch controls for all your buttons. And yeah, it was very conventional.
Exactly. And this is really interesting because this is during the time, I think, when Citroen was taken over by PSA. Yes. Or that was actually happened when the Mark I in the 80s, I think, roughly like late 70s, early 80s kind of period. And a lot of Citroen, we can attest to this in the Citroen community nowadays, they find it really difficult to connect with the BX because it was so much more normal than the GS or the GSA or the DS or things along those lines. But this is a car that was really important for Citroen because they had to be normal to try and sell. Because at the end of the day, do you know off the top of your head how many they sold, roughly? I think they sold over 2 million or something along those lines.
Oh, well over 2 million.
Well over 2 million. And they built them from 82 till 94. Okay. And we were talking about this the other day. The cars that have a really long production run just show how far ahead of time they were when they were first introduced.
Totally right, Zaid. I'm a great believer that the longer the car actually stays on a production line, it is a direct correlation between the life cycle or the period the car is being produced, to the success of the car.
Correct.
Yes. So Yes, the Citroen body shell, both the hatchback and the estate versions, were in production, as you mentioned, for that period of time, from around 82 to 94. But there were different versions of the car. Nevertheless, the body still remained the same.
Yeah.
There were updated engines, of course, to meet with emission regulations and stuff like this. But the car itself has remained the same. So it has been a tremendous success.
100%. And they made so many different variants, and it won Tow Car of the Year. It was one of the most popular kind of sales cars or rep cars in the UK as well. It was a very, very popular car. But the thing is, nowadays, you don't see them on the road. When was the last time you saw a Citroen BX?
Well, for me, I got two parked.
Well, you got two parked at home.
But actually, one of the sad things is that you don't see too many cars from this era, largely because of the dreaded rust. Yeah, and any cars which were built around the 80s, the technology those days to galvanize steel and the quality of the steel. I remember when I was a Citroen technician, we used to inject all the cavities with a special type of oil to try and prevent them from rusting. And that was like an important part. But today, of course, cars don't rust. It was rust which basically took them to their grave. So that's why we don't tend to see too many, because most of the examples today on the road are cars which have been saved by people like myself.
100%.
And restored back to their glory, or at least just kept running as a daily runner.
Exactly. Fantastic. Okay, now we're going to come on to the last BX that you've owned. One that we missed out. Talk us through that.
Okay, so the last BX I took delivery of, again, it was a similar kind of story. I learned about the BX 16 valve. I had a black one.
See if I can find a picture of it, actually.
Yeah.
I do have a picture of it, actually.
And the car was first advertised in my dealer in a magazine, a journal, in the summer of 1987. It was launched in France in March of 1987. And this is the car which has the 16 valve engine. There you go, lovely picture of it, so you can see it in its glory.
With its new brother.
With its new brother parked in the front. So I took delivery of this car in January of 1988. What can I tell you about it? It's a fast car.
It's effing fast.
It has around, 158 horsepower to be exact, with a 0 to 60 sub 8 seconds. Yes, so it's extremely quick. And one of the reasons for that is it's a very torquey and very powerful engine. And as I said, this is just sitting over 1,000 kilograms, about 1,080.
Literally just 1,000 kilograms.
Yes, just a bit over 1,000 kilograms.
This car, I have to say, I didn't really know what it was until I drove it. And honestly, it is one of the greatest driving experiences I've ever had. I've driven a lot of cars, and there's something about a high revving, naturally aspirated French engine. Like, they have so much character. You get into a French car and you just know, even if it's a basic car, Renault Twingo, Citroen Saxo, whatever you get into, it's got that character. And the BX 16 valve has it in spades. It's got so much character. A couple of interesting things about this car. This was actually the first production 16 valve car, actually. But the engine is not a Citroen engine. It's a Peugeot engine. So the car came out in 1987, and as my dad said, 158 brake horsepower. So if you think about it, 158 brake horsepower in a car that only weighs a ton. This particular engine is really, really special. Known kind of within the community as the MI16 lump, or the XU9J4 if you want to be really, really nerdy. But my favourite thing about this engine is the history and the pedigree behind it. Cylinder head in this car was the same kind of head they use on the Peugeot 205 T16 rally car from 1986.
Yes, indeed.
And they spent 6 years developing that cylinder head. And when we took it apart, because, we did a pretty major overhaul on this, and it's so beautiful to see the construction and how the engine is built, and you can just really tell the valves are absolutely huge, considering it's a 16 valve, huge valves. And it's a work of art, honestly. It's a work of art. And that's unfortunate why we don't really see that many of these cars on the road, because of these engines. These are known to be taken out of BX 16 valves and this was also used in the 405 MI16, 309 GTI 16 valve, although that's a very, very rare car. So it was only used in very, very few cars. But what people they took the engines out and they put them in 205 GTIs. Because the block was basically the same as a standard 1.9 block, but the heads were interchangeable, or mostly so. And as a result, most of these cars ended up rotting, dying, and the engines they just lived on in other cars. So this is the BX 16 valve. Honestly, it's one of the most special cars you will ever see and ever drive, especially because of the Marcello Gandini design. I think we should tell the viewers, just really quickly, about our experience taking the BX 16 valve, our BX 16 valve, to celebrate the life of Marcello Gandini. Let me tell you a little story, okay? So, Marcello Gandini was one of the most influential, if not the most influential, car designers of recent times of the previous century. And as I mentioned before, at the beginning of this podcast, he was responsible for many, many great cars, such as a host of Lamborghinis. Lamborghini Diablo, Lamborghini Countach, Lamborghini Miura. So he was really, really kind of pivotal in terms of supercars, Bugatti EB110, but he also designed passenger cars as well, and one of his notable efforts was the Citroen BX. So unfortunately, this year, Marcello passed away. And, obviously it affected the community quite badly. So I'm sure a lot of the viewers or listeners actually are aware of Villa d'Este Concours of Elegance. Okay, this is one of the most prestigious car events that takes place in Europe, if not the world. And they were planning on hosting a Gandini tribute. And I was very lucky to get in touch or to have someone reach out to me. Benny Voss, if you're listening, shout out Benny Voss. Thank you so much for that opportunity again. Benny wrote to me on Instagram and he said, "Hey, are you going to Italy at all this year?" And I said, "Nah, not really. Villa d'Este is not really our thing. I mean, there are lots of fancy, expensive, exuberant cars and it's nice, but, it's not really on our bucket list to go." And then he continues saying, "Oh, we're planning a Gandini exhibition and it will be really cool to have your Citroen BX there." And I remember I was sitting in a lecture in university and I just got up, walked out of the room and I gave my dad a call and I said, "Dad, get the car ready. We're driving to Italy. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Now, you guys got to remember that this is not a car meet. It's a car show. It's something where your car... You don't just get up and leave whenever you want to leave. The car's got to be parked there the whole day. We had over nearly 20,000 people walk in and visit. And we then set off on this incredible journey. We drove from Munich all the way down to Lake Como in the Citroen BX to celebrate the life of Marcello Gandini. And we had some pretty good company. As you can see here, this is a really pretty incredible image. Lamborghini Countach and a Citroen BX. And what's really, really funny about this is that a lot of people walking past the exhibit were like, "Hang on a minute, what's a Citroen BX doing here? This is like a completely normal car." But people completely forget that the BX was one of Gandini's works. And as you mentioned before, a car in production for, 12 years, really shows you how much it stood the test of time. Yeah. This was honestly a really, really special experience, and I really, really want to thank BMW Group Classic again for this opportunity, because it's not very often that you get the opportunity to be parked amongst this great company. What were you feeling on this day?
Absolutely. I think one of the most amazing things for me is the fact that we were selected to present our 16 valve BX at Villa d'Este. And perhaps more importantly is that the car actually was driven down there on its own steam, whereas a lot of the other cars were actually trailered down there. So that was a feat on its own. And for me, the car behaved itself very well. As you can see, it looks absolutely immaculate. This car is actually concours. It's really nut and bolt, full restoration, and It's such a lovely car to drive. We didn't have any issues at all driving it, as you would expect from a car which of that age. So, and the whole complete engine had been restored by myself. So I brought back my old skills from the 80s. Still have it in the back of my head somehow. And as you can see, it's very clean, very perfect. And I even went down to the details to really make sure that simple things like labels, as you can see on this image there's a label there, which comes from the factory, that even the labels from the factory are positioned in exactly the right position. So yeah, the car is a perfect example of how a BX 16 valve should be. Car behaved itself really well, and what a great car to drive.
Honestly, let me tell you something that's so beautiful about this is that you started your career in Citroen, and this is the car that you fell in love with, and now you're coming to a stage now where you can celebrate this car and let other people appreciate it, and it's just such a beautiful kind of full circle moment that you've managed to get a car, which we should also mention that the car you had was exactly the same color in exactly the same spec, phase 1 16 valve, and you managed to kind of keep that fire still burning inside you to restore one, bring another one back to life, and celebrate it with a whole load of other great supercars designed by this incredible man. And the other day we got some incredible shots of the car taken here, as you can see here. I mean, honestly, this car, it was really one of those pinch yourself moments to have your car be selected to be part of this incredible exhibition. And it just made me fall in love with it even more. So this car is definitely a keeper. But what about our other car?
Okay, right. So as I said to you earlier on, we were looking through the internet, and I came across this 16 valve in Luxembourg, and well, the price was right. It was a bit of a scary thing to buy.
It was a bit
car.
of a gamble, honestly. It was a massive. I remember my dad just giving me a call saying, "Oh, there's a 16 valve going for very cheap, and I'm really inclined to buy it." And I'm like, "Oh my days, what's going to happen now?" And it was honestly one of those sight unseen purchases. Like, what's really funny is that when we bought the black car, my dad spent a good 3 or 4 hours at least going underneath, checking it, making sure there's no rot, making sure that everything is all okay, like 100% just really going through it with a fine tooth comb. And this grey car, we just called the guy and just said, yeah, we'll take it. There was so much interest in it.
Yes.
So many people were trying to pay more money for it and whatever. And we were just like, we'll just take it. Whatever happens, we'll just take the car. And if it rots, it rots. If it goes, it goes. If it's good, it's good. And now we've had the car for a couple of days. You've explored it a little bit more.
Actually, what we did was, we bought it pretty much blind.
We bought it blind, yeah.
So the only thing I could do, because as I mentioned to you, they do rot.
Yeah.
And I know exactly where they rot.
Yeah.
Yes. So what I did is I took my car to a car park, and I Teams called or FaceTimed. WhatsApp audio. I called the guy who was selling this car, because he obviously doesn't know where to look for the rust. So I pointed my camera at all the locations where they normally rust. For example, on the rear sills,
Exactly.
the inside by the washer bottles and the rear valance and all those places. So I kind of pointed out exactly where they rust. And so he just followed his camera and pointed the camera to the same places where I was pointing my camera.
On your 16
on
valve.
my 16 valve. And from what I saw over the camera was that the car didn't appear to have any real bad rust issues. Of course, he wasn't able to crawl underneath the car at the usual places, so we took a bit of a gamble on that one.
Yes.
But nevertheless, it looked pretty good from the outside. So we, bought it.
We bought it, and this is the next project. So, okay, what are the differences between this car and the car we currently have?
Okay, good question. The black 16 valve is different to the 16V, as this has been labelled, One major difference is that the engines are, even though they look the same and they are based on the same casting and technology, is that the engine on the black car is fitted with a catalytic converter. Ooh. And yeah, that's right, emission control.
Yes.
Because Germany in the 80s, in the late 80s, it became regulation that cars needed to be equipped with catalytic converters. So the black car, my 16 valve, has a catalytic converter which has a slightly reduced output in power of 147 horsepower, whereas the grey, the meteor grey to be
grey,
the precise colour of the car, it has 158 horsepower.
So yeah, 158 horsepower, you get a little bit more torque. Other differences include you got different compression ratios. I think the pistons are different as well.
Yeah, you got slightly different compression ratios. Yeah. No catalytic converter, of course.
No catalytic converter, no lambda sensors, none of that. But the beauty of this is that this is a pure 16 valve. It's like it's fully breathing. It's not restrained, and you are going to notice that difference in
sure.
Power.
Definitely.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Okay, so to round up, so we've kind of spoken a lot about BXs, about your BXs, about the story of some of our BXs. For anyone who wants to buy a Citroen BX, okay, would you recommend it as a good kind of entry into classic car ownership? And what kind of things would you if someone were to look out to buy for a BX, what are the top 3 things you need to look out for?
Okay, very good. Top 3 things. Rust. Well, I'll start off with rust.
Yes.
Because as I say, during the 80s, they weren't treating the metals like what they do nowadays.
Yes.
So you need to look for rust, especially around certain points, like where the washer bottles are, for example. Underneath the car at the jacking points, you can see exactly that where the exhaust hanger is. There are certain areas you need to look for and make sure it's not rotten. Yes. They tend to rust from the inside out. So having a good look underneath the car is also important. So that's the number 1 thing. So check for rot.
Okay.
Second thing is that the Citroen suspension system uses what's known as LHM, hydraulic fluid. It's green in color. So if you see any drops underneath the car, as you see here, that green fluid which is dropping off from underneath, that indicates that you've got a hydraulic leak, which could be coming from a high pressure line or a low pressure line. So yeah, if it's dripping hydraulic fluid, well, it's not so bad as rust because you can normally fix it, whereas rust you need to weld it and cut stuff out. But that's the second most important thing, yes. No leaks, or you will always have leaks, but not bad leaks. So it's not really pouring stuff out. And the second thing is noises. When you start the engine, of course, the engine needs to start and it needs not to rattle and knock and make all those horrible noises you'd hear from a normal car. But in particular, listen to the pump. Because the pump normally cuts in every 30 to 40 seconds. If it's cutting in more frequently, if there's any other peculiar noises coming from around the engine bay, then I'd also exercise caution. But again, it can be repaired. But the worst thing which you could come across is rust. So stay well clear of a car if you've got rust, unless you're prepared to cut it out and weld it.
Exactly. No, that's very good. And just really quickly, hydraulics, should people be scared of it? Is it as complicated as people make it out to be?
Well, for someone who doesn't really know what it is, it can be quite daunting to have a look at a hydraulic system because there's pipes going everywhere. But in a nutshell, it's a relatively simple system. The hydraulics is that it controls and it supplies the braking, steering, and suspension systems all of the same circuit. So basically, you've got brakes, steering, suspension, which is all powered by a simple pump, a hydraulic pump, and the hydraulic pump creates a flow, which creates pressure in those systems. And not too complicated. Yes, because you can actually buy a lot of the parts nowadays.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be something we should be too worried about. But if you've got lots of leaks, it's very likely to be a return pipe which is leaking.
Exactly. That's very good. Fantastic. Well, that, I think, would wrap it up then. Citroen BX, yay or nay?
Yay, absolute yay.
Fantastic, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Cars and Culture. We really hope that you enjoy this new layout. I really hope that I could use this studio a little bit more, to be honest. Should come here more often and do some more podcasts. Anyway, please feel free to follow us on social media. Write comments underneath. Let us know what you think. Let us know what your opinion is on a Citroen BX. Maybe we've converted you. And let us know what your favourite French car is. We'd love to know. Anyway, that's it from us. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, and goodbye.